That was the kind of evening's entertainment he loved, and apparently people enjoyed it too. At least it's better than some of the conversations we had in Plastic Society. Okay, now let's see. David, you were asking something. Yeah, that's rather noticeable. Certainly there's no natural law ethic, and there cannot be, because if you don't have real essences and final causes, you cannot have the sort of natural law ethic which came out of Thomas Aquinas, you see. You might say, well, what about the Stoic conception of natural law? A life of reason. Well, that seems to be what he's talking about, but he's construing it in a prudential fashion, you see, which isn't altogether what the Stoics do. I think you get a more loyal version of Stoic natural law when you get to John Locke, perhaps Thomas Jefferson, you see, more so than Descartes. It's in the personal ethic, as Dr. Chappell noted, that Descartes is so much like the Stoics. A theological ethic? No, because he is separating theology from philosophy. You see, his very method, his enterprise, is to see what can be established by reason alone in breaking out of skepticism. You see. So the theological ethic he'll leave to the theologians, and the application of that theological ethic he'll leave to the church, and in following the religion of his childhood upbringing, he'll follow that. But what's the relationship of his provisional ethic to that? Well, it seems to be he's saying don't shake the boat. So he has sort of a general prudential ethic which would support the continuance of the traditional religious ethic.
Could he pick up, you mentioned the finances on that a lot. I'm wondering, why couldn't Descartes sort of pick it up? Because he did see God as a good guy, and he saw that his senses were reliable. Could he have used his senses to somehow get a general sense of what was right and wrong?
Well, is wrong a sense quality? No, they're not physical properties, you see. How would you get from your sense perception of particular things, how would you get any ethical conclusion? Well, I think his way is probably the one way. Watch the consequences of actions. You see, that takes sense perception. Watch the consequences of actions and avoid those which are going to cause problems. Pursue those which are going to make life more bearable, you see. So really, he is anticipating the utilitarian approach, that if you're going to come at ethics empirically, you see, then you come at ethics in terms of consequences. And inasmuch as reason on an a priori basis yields no ethic, it's the passions which give rise to the ethic, you see. It has to be that way. Okay, just a few words about the Cartesian influence. I think it's fair to say that the remainder of the 17th century was dominated by Descartes. The term Cartesian is used not only in speaking about Descartes, but about many of the successors of his. We've mentioned Spinoza, and we'll be spending next week on Spinoza, Cartesian. And as you read him, watch the parallels to Descartes all the way through. Very, very evident. Parallels also in Leibniz, who will be on the week after. Many other individuals that we won't take time to talk about, but one individual who's often mentioned is the Frenchman Malebranche, who was a metaphysical idealist. John Locke, at the end of the 17th century, while a thoroughgoing empiricist, also shows a lot of Descartes' influence. George Berkeley, likewise, British idealist. So the whole period is now going to be dominated by the Cartesian influence. It's very, very hard to avoid. You get materialists like Hobbes and a Frenchman, the Baron de la Mettrie, who is Hobbesian in his view of nature, taking a thoroughly mechanistic view. Or there is a skeptic like Peter Bale, who builds on a Cartesian kind of skepticism, taking as the criterion clear and distinct ideas, criterion for what's acceptable as true, and relentlessly argues that there is nothing that we know with clarity and distinctness. And Bale had a profound influence on the skepticism of David Hume later on. The influence of his method is something we have to keep in mind, this building out of nothing, reconstructing a whole philosophical position, foundationalism. But one individual who, while hardly a Cartesian, is a contemporary of his, reacting somewhat against him, a man we need to take note of is, of course, Blaise Pascal. And so just a few comments about Pascal. Born 1623, died 1662, younger contemporary then of Descartes. He wasn't really a philosopher. He was a mathematician. He was a Christian apologist, a member of the Jansenist movement. Jansenism was a sort of evangelical renewal movement within the Roman Church, post-Reformation. He stands in contrast to much of Descartes' emphasis. Let me come into Pascal with his distinction between two kinds of knowledge, what he calls rational knowledge and intuitive knowledge. Those two. Rational knowledge is the kind of thing that Descartes was after. Deductive reasoning, such as functions in mathematics. Mathematical type reasoning that tries to demonstrate conclusions with logical certainty. Now, that kind of rationality, Pascal regards as applicable in mathematics, he was a mathematician, but inapplicable in natural science, theology, metaphysics, and ethics. Now, let me run through those four. Inapplicable in natural science, because there we must proceed observationally. amassing examples, enumerating cases, experimenting, and in natural science of an empirical sort, probabilities are what we have to work with. Not logical certainty, but probability. And it's those kinds of empirical probabilities that guide his writings about Christian apologetics, where he makes a lot of use of historical evidence, what he takes to be the evidence that miracles offer, the evidence that fulfilled prophecy offers. You see, there it's the empirical method of probabilities that are involved, but not the demonstrative reasoning of mathematics. In theology, again, a demonstrative reasoning of a mathematical sort doesn't apply because theology begins with the biblical revelation rather than with universally accessible axioms. In metaphysics, where you would have natural theology proposed, again it doesn't imply. He regards the classic arguments for the existence of God as invalid. You cannot demonstrate logically the existence or the nature of God. Natural theology fails. We need divine revelation to know about God. He is to be thought of, to use his phrase, as Deus absconditus and as Deus revelatus, the God who has absented himself and the God who reveals himself, but not as a God who can be known by demonstrative reasoning. In fact, he maintains, in keeping with the skepticism of his day, that metaphysical arguments for and against positions are equipotent. They have equal weight and are therefore quite indecisive. In ethics, again, you have disagreements which cannot be rationally settled. To know thyself, Socrates' dictum, to know thyself, to know the supreme good, is impossible apart from the Christian revelation. So what you have then, interestingly, in Pascal, is a thoroughgoing skepticism. He seems to adopt the Pyrrhonic skepticism of the day, Pyrrhonism, the sort of thing that Sextus Empiricus had systematized. And in doing so, he takes it that he is uncovering our desperate state of need. Interesting, a Christian skeptic, which is what he is. Now, frequently, that kind of skepticism in Christian thinkers is associated with some kind of intuition, religious intuition. And that is not unlike what Pascal has in mind by talking of intuitive knowledge. And a kind of intuitive knowledge which is a direct personal awareness. Direct personal awareness of what? Well, it applies in physics in regards to space. It's a matter of intuitive awareness that space is three-dimensional. Religious faith, belief in God, is a kind of intuitive awareness of the divine being. This intuition provides a kinds of natural beliefs which are spontaneous on our part, not the result of chains of argument or inference. And maybe you're familiar with his classic way of putting it. The heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. You familiar with that quotation? The heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. Now, I've asked myself what he means by the heart, as distinct from the mind, you see. And in our popular vocabulary, I think going back to the 18th century, the heart is usually spoken of as the seat of emotions. Now, I don't think that that is Pascal's use of the term. I think Pascal uses the term the heart more in the biblical sense, where it is the unifying core of the whole personality. In other words, he sees reason as involving only part of a person's God-given faculties. He sees intuition, the kind of thing the heart knows, as involving the whole of the personality in the very depth of its being, by virtue of its inner nature. So that it is by virtue of our nature as physical beings that we're aware of the three-dimensionality of space. It's by virtue of the fact that we are at heart religious beings in the image of God, that faith in God, belief in God is a spontaneous thought of response of the person to the world in which God has put us. So the heart has its reasons that the mind does not know. Pascal stands in that regard as a critic of the kind of rationalism that is going to develop for the Enlightenment. An early critic of it. And it's sometimes said that the next time you get anybody like that, it's Soren Kierkegaard. Pascal and Kierkegaard. Two interesting terms. There is one other side to Pascal, of course, Pascal's wager, where in terms of the existence of God, he proposes that it pays to wager. It's an interesting sort of consequential thing. The prudent thing is to believe. It's as if he's picking up on the right reason notion all over again. You see? Because in that sense, right reason would go something like this. Either God exists or he does not exist. If he does exist and you believe it, you have everything to gain. If he does not exist but you believe he does, you have nothing to lose. If he does not exist and if he does exist and you do not believe it, you have everything to lose. So the gain is all on wagering that God exists. That's the prudent thing to do. And so that famous Pascal's wager, you see, is assessing, as it were, probabilities. I read somewhere that he was very interested in the theory of probability because he had watched his friends gambling. And it was a theory of chances that he saw illustrated in the chances they took that egged him on in that direction. So, okay, Pascal then in contrast to Descartes. Now, questions, comments on that, Judge? David? A whole philosophy? No, he's not a philosopher. In the sense that he's not developing philosophical theory, philosophical arguments. On the other hand, while he has a negative view of the possibility of effective arguments and theories, he's very much alert to logic. you see, the limitations of deductive logic, which was getting a lot of criticism ever since Descarte, and the possibilities of inductive logic, you see, probability theory. So in that sense, his contribution is much more in regards to logic. He invented, what I understand, is the first calculating machine. That's why his name has been given to computers, Pascal. This was a mathematician at work. He even worked out a public transportation plan, I think it was, for the city of Paris. He was interested in city planning and all that sort of thing. But this is the mathematical mind at work in those things. Okay, any other comments? Questions? Yeah.
I have a question on Descartes.
Okay.
I just wondered if you could revamp what right reason means to change what we can. I had that
Yeah.
I don't really
Yeah.
What can we change?
Yeah. There are two kinds of things we can change. One kind much more effectively than the other. We are most effective in changing our own emotions, changing our passions. And we do that by choosing to set before ourselves clear ideas about consequences that might follow from giving such passions free rein. That clear perception of consequences is likely to turn what was desire to do that into a disinclination to do it. You see? So we can modify our own passions. The thing we cannot change as effectively is the circumstances of our lives, external things. We can do that sometimes, in some particulars, but obviously we're not as effective there. So then, the good life, the life that's more bearable, is one in which we are free because of our clarity of mind to change the things that we can and to gain, to win a contentment of mind in the face of things we cannot change.
So it's not a purely mechanical. If we didn't have the mind, if we did not have right reason, our bodies are still going completely mechanical.
Yes, yes.
But we can have some control of it.
And this is what makes the human animal different from others.
And this is what makes it more of a rationalist.
Yes, yes. Yeah, although keep in mind that the difference between rationalism and empiricism is in terms of the sources of knowledge. You see, he's a rationalist in that regard. The term rationalism has at least three different meanings. Have we talked about that before?
I'm sure we have.
Well, let's refresh our minds. At least three different meanings. The first is rationalism over against empiricism, which has to do purely and simply with the sources of our knowledge. The empiricist claims that all knowledge comes ultimately from experience. Now, what you do thereafter may be exactly the same as Descartes did. In fact, for Locke it is. Locke wants to get empirical premises from which to do his deductive building. Descartes has a priori premises from which he does his deductive building. The difference between them is on the sources of the premises, the ultimate sources of knowledge, a priori or empirical. So that's one kind of rationalism, that which distinguishes Descartes from empiricists like John Locke. The second kind of rationalism stands over against what's called fideism. And I suppose that did Pascal not give attention to things like historical evidences, he would sound like a fideist. Because a fideist is one who, well, simply believes, for whom belief is unrelated to evidence or argument. Whereas a rationalist is one for whom belief in very large measure depends on evidence or argument. Rationalist versus fideist. Fideist, yeah. It's a term that's, obviously it's drawn from the term fides, faith. But it's a term that's used all the time in contemporary philosophy of religion, epistemology, so forth. Fideism is against rationalism. It's often contrasted with foundationalism or evidentialism, fideism. Yeah, so to say that Descartes is in that sense is a rationalist is simply saying he's a foundationalist. Now the third sense of rationalism has to do with this kind of moral psychology that we've come across now in Descartes. That reason is able to rule in the moral life. That the clarity of ideas, the light of reason in that sense, can dispel certain emotions. You see? The power of reason over emotion. Reason over the will. That's taken to be rationalism. If it were the other way around with the will, it would be voluntarism. So this is rationalism over against voluntarism. Or, in as much as it has to do with feelings and emotions, I suppose you could say rationalism over against romanticism. Yeah. Rationalism over against romanticism. Well, Descartes is a rationalist in all three senses. He's a rationalist, not an empiricist. He's a rationalist, not a fideist. He's a rationalist, not a voluntarist.